promptly. Welcome to the webinar on organisational review and redesign. My name is Claire Cameron, and I'm one of the directors at PAI. Some of you I recognise some names in the participants. So some of you will know that Public Administration International is a London-based consultancy and organisation, and we specialise in strengthening governance worldwide. Our webinar today looks at strategies and approaches to examining the structures and ways of managing and delivering services, and at options for redesign and change. That's an area actually that we have done quite a lot of consultancy work in over the years, most recently in the Gambia, where we looked at all of the government ministries and their agencies, and currently an ongoing project in Barbados, which is reviewing 6 pilot ministries with a view to then rolling out and reviewing all the other main central government ministries and their agencies. So, and Stephen Catchpole, who I'm delighted to introduce in a moment, is our, here he comes, is our presenter today. And Stephen has been the team leader on those 2 projects that I mentioned and many others, and will say a word about his own background and experience in a moment. Stephen's also going to be the workshop director for a new workshop that we have running next year on functional reviews, which will give people guidance on how to conduct them, and including a toolkit for putting these reviews into practice. So when Stephen's finished his presentation, he'd be very happy to take questions. Please do join in and add your comments and questions in the chat box. But I'll hand over to my colleague Amanda now to just take us through the way that the software works, so that we can hopefully get plenty of participation and engagement. So over to you, please, Amanda, and I'll rejoin at the end after.
Thank you, Claire. So a warm welcome to everyone this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Just to go through some very quick admin notes. Down the left-hand side, you'll see there is a questions box, a poll box, a chat box, and a handouts box. We will ask you for any questions that you have throughout the webinar. Please put them into the questions box, as we will be reading these out at the end of the webinar, and Stephen will be very happy to answer those questions for you. We will be launching some polls throughout the webinar as well, so we do ask that you participate in these. For the chat box, as you can see, a lot of us have already been starting to chat with each other. So please do put your thoughts and feelings into the chat box, chat amongst yourselves, chat with us as well. We're happy to answer your questions. And in the handouts box, you will see that there is a brochure for the functional reviews workshop that we are running next year, and also the link to our website with the functional reviews workshop as well, with some more information. Stephen, I'm going to hand over the control to you now. So hopefully that should pop up for you.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant.
Well, good day to everybody, and welcome to this webinar. My name's Stephen Catchpole, as already been announced, and I've been working with public administration on and off now for over 26 years. And I see that we've got representatives today, about 90 of participants representing 30 countries. And I've been to many of your countries or your neighbours' countries undertaking these sorts of organisational reviews, helping governments and institutions linked to them to prepare themselves for the future. So I'd like to share some of those experiences with you today, but also take you through what we mean by organizational reviews and redesign. So the scope of the webinar today is, first of all, to think about what we mean by an organizational functional review and redesign, have a look at why they're required, the history of approaches. Things over the years have changed, and the way in which we analyze organizations have changed in the way we undertake these reviews. So I just want to go through some of those with you. And then look at the steps in a review and the redesign process of what I call the architecture of organizations or the architecture of government. And then we'll look very briefly at some of the challenges for change and how to address them. So I'd like to start with what do we mean by an organizational review and redesign? It's a process for looking at the outcome of shaping an organizational architecture and trying to align it with the purpose of the organization and the context in which the organization exists. I talk about organizational review, but very often they're called functional reviews, efficiency reviews, capability reviews, and we also have audit systems looking at financial and systems audits, looking at how organizations operate. But very often those are how we're operating today. And I think it's important at an early stage to start thinking about what about tomorrow? We should be looking ahead. We should be looking in advance and trying to anticipate change and making sure that the organization is capable of going into the future and has the capacity and resources to be able to undertake the work that it's required to do. So what we look at is creating a structure and systems that support the effectiveness and efficiency in the delivery of services. And importantly as well, at least cost. Funding is always difficult. Governments struggle with funding. Organizations struggle with funding as the economies grow and diminish over time. So we need to take account of that as well. And we need to ensure that the organization can operate within laws, mandates, and objectives set by ministers or shareholders if you're working in the private sector. And we need to think about those, especially when laws and mandates change. We've seen recently in the UK a change of government, and only this week in America, in the USA. And philosophies and policies change as a consequence of that. And that means that we therefore, in government, very often have to change very rapidly to take account of those new philosophies and those changes. For example, already we've heard in America, changes that will affect trade, will affect foreign relations and health, and also immigration. So those ministries that are connected with those and others have got to be prepared to be able to change rapidly, to be able to operate in the appropriate way to take account of those changes. So when we start thinking about organizational reviews, we need to be aware of the context and the environment in which they are working and how they will meet the objectives set through these different mandates and philosophies, etc. It's all very well looking at an organization from an internal perspective. There's a board of management, there will be operational management, there are employees, and we set objectives and targets in order to take us into the future. And boards and management teams have to be able to establish what sort of organization they need and the functions that they need to be able to do that. But that doesn't work in a vacuum. We have to look at the intermediate environment around us. Who are our customers? Who are our competitors? Who are our suppliers? Who are our strategic partners that we can work together with in meeting our objectives? And then, of course, there are the rules and regulations, and they very often change. But sometimes we find that they haven't changed significantly to take account of the current needs and the future needs of what organizations are doing. I've recently been into several countries and several organizations where I've seen constitutions and acts and regulations dating back to the 1950s and 1960s. And in one particular instance, I came across one dated 1897. Now, whilst those laws and regulations may have been amended with additional regulations, the fundamental principles of some of those constitutions and those primary legislations need to be looked at and reviewed. And that may well mean a change in strategy, a change in structure in the organization that needs to then take account of those changes. So as well as that intermediate environment, we also need to look at the external environment. That's both domestic and international. I've already mentioned the political environment, which might change. That's not only of a change of government in your own country, but also around the world, which affects how we develop our social and our cultural and economic systems and our use of our technologies and the environment in which we work. The environment these days is not just how the immediate environment, but we also need to take account of things like changes in climate, environmental changes and hazards that are causing us to have to rethink how we operate in government and how we operate in the private sector to take account of those. We all in many countries, I've heard this over and over again over the last few months actually, in terms of aging populations and how we're going to cope with new diseases, etc., through our ministries of health. Climate change means that ministries of environment have got to also take consequence of those. And what are we going to do about flooding? What are we going to do about desertification? What else are we having to do in terms of things like housing, food, and water provision? And that affects all of these organizations and how they operate. So functional and organizational reviews are important to be done consistently and constantly to take account of these changes. I've mentioned environment, for example. We've had recent flooding in the UK and in Europe. Our houses are not built to cope with that. Our environmental drainage systems are not coping with that at the moment. And so we've got to think about how we take account of increasing temperatures. Many houses in the UK, for example, are not air conditioned or insulated in the right way. And so we have to look at those and take account of how ministries operate and organizations operate to cope with those things. So some of the aspects that I've mentioned already are advantageous to us. Changes in government may make it easier. Some changes in government may make it harder. But we need to take account of the positives within those environments and see how we can utilize those to strengthen what we do. But in addition, there will be the shocks to the system, which cause us to have to rethink how we approach our operations and functions, etc. So why do we review and redesign? Why is it required? Albert Einstein suggested that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And I think that's a basic thing that we have to consider when we're looking at organizational reviews and designs. Change is inevitable and constant. And these days, change is rapid. If we go back to when I first joined the civil service back in the early 1970s, governments provided central systems, national organizations that provided almost everything. Private sector had very little to do with it. But these days, it's changed, and change is rapid. We've seen the introduction of AI, etc., over the last few years. And that means that the ways in which we operate are changing very rapidly and changing almost day to day, not in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. What we anticipated would happen in 10 years' time is happening today. And Winston Churchill, one of UK's prime ministers, also said, to improve is to change. To be perfect is to change often. And I think that's a fundamental principle that we need to take account of and be prepared to engage very quickly and undertake changes rapidly. And in a book, The Lean Startup by Eric Rice, where he talks about how to start up small organizations right from the beginning. And he suggests that it's about, again, adjusting processes and performance to meet the challenges of today very quickly. And startup organizations are able to do that because they're new and innovative. But many times governments, etc., that have been around a long time are fixed in their old ideas and their old ways of working. And the whole point of some of these reviews is to challenge that status quo. I mentioned in my opening remarks that the approaches we use have changed due to history, and these are due to the different industrial revolutions. The first and second one saw mechanization of methods, early machines replacing people, tractors in farms, machines in factories, etc., railways, etc., beginning to develop and using machinery. Max Weber in the late 1800s, early 20s, talked about the effective organizations are characterized by robust and consistent processes and clear hierarchical structures, tight management control and supervision, with little individual autonomy. That was the way in which organizations worked, where the boss said what to do and everybody did it consistently, and management structures followed that ethic. But these days we've moved to more flexible organizations that are able to change, and that staff at lower levels now become managers themselves. Then early technologies came along, and we saw railways and mass production lines through F.W. Taylor and Ford, the Ford production lines. And in Japan, where a different culture existed in terms of performance and how people worked, they had quality circles, looking at how teams work together and how the effects of our interrelations with people changed the way in which we work and the way in which the organization felt for people. Then we saw the third revolution, the information age, where our jobs started to be, our processes started to be replaced by computers, automated processing, email, social media, online chatbots, data warehousing, customer relationship management, databases and software, and enterprise relationship management software, call centers developing, and early robotics, where the need for people and processes change rapidly. In the civil service, when I first joined, and I'm still finding it in some underdeveloped countries, where we all have computers, we all have laptops, and therefore we don't need typists and stenographers anymore, because a lot of that can be done automatically, and we've all become typists. So those jobs change, and therefore the structures of the organizations change. And then, of course, we've got the fourth revolution, where we're seeing artificial intelligence, gene editing, drones, and advanced robotics starting to clear warehousing, the need for people in warehouses, where we can get our food and our products packed and delivered by machines. And then we're now into the fifth revolution, where humans are now starting to have to work alongside advanced technologies and AI-powered robots to enhance workplace processes. But that gives us challenges. Integrating of technology and human labor needs us to think about how we balance the advanced technologies with the need for people to have jobs, people to have occupations that take up their time. And we need to think about cybersecurity, protecting sensitive information that we share so rapidly, and ethics, the privacy and misuse of technology, gene engineering, etc., and protecting the way in which people work and the information is exchanged. And sustainability, balancing advancement with large-scale implementation. We constantly hear that large businesses are closing down. I've mentioned warehousing, where there's no longer the need for people to lift and move products around, packing them into boxes and having them delivered. Machines are doing that. And we need to balance our ability to do that, but also with employing people. And inevitably, because of these changes, there are skills gaps, new occupations coming up, requiring training and education to bridge the gap. And so when we look at organizations, we also have to think about the education systems. We're doing a review in a Ministry of Education. Then that's the fundamental area that we're going to be looking at this. But I've looked at institutions where changes have occurred, and then I've had to turn around and say to people, how does the education system actually support these changes? Have you got people coming out of university in 10 years' time or 15 years' time who are now in primary school? Are they going to come out in 18 years' time with the right qualifications and skills for the new occupations? So I mentioned earlier about looking at today and saying, have we the capability? But we've also got to look at the capability for the future. What will jobs look like in the future? What will organizations look like in the future? And so when we do these reviews, we have to start thinking about how all of these systems are integrated and make sure that we have the strategies and the policies ready for the future. And we have I've talked about ethics, etc., but regulatory and legal issues, ensuring that the laws and regulations are up to date and effective in this continuous challenge. Inevitably, all of this comes back to the economic disparities that we see and the uneven distribution of wealth and benefits. So when we look at health systems, trade systems, foreign relations systems, etc., we also need to start thinking about the wealth and welfare and benefits that people have, either in country or in their own personal lives. And how are our policies and strategies going to take account of those? So we're seeing full circle to some extent, I think, going away from things like people in fields doing farming to machinery taking over, organizational structures and processes changing, the introduction of robotics and quality circles and mechanization, and balancing those processes and systems with the strategies that we need to engage people. So the shift to organic or systems approach is important because we now need to start even more focusing on the culture and the people rather than the structure itself. So we're very much looking at how people are affected by these changes, as well as the changes in the structures themselves. So what is an organization? Well, it's a system. It has all sorts of elements to it. There are the policies, there are the procedures and the processes and the strategies, the equipment, the way in which the skills are utilized or available within the organization, the way in which people communicate with each other, and the leadership styles that there are, whether they are participative or autocratic, and how that affects the way in which the culture develops. And so we need to look at all of these aspects as we're doing these functional reviews. We're not just looking at what are the jobs and how should we structure them. We have to take account of all of these things, as well as the processes that run through the organization and the objectives and the results that we are expecting from them. Before I continue, I'd like us to have a short poll and just give me some of your reactions to some of these questions. And I'd like to ask Amanda just to introduce it and explain the poll to you.
Thank you, Stephen. So I'm going to launch the first poll. So the first question is, which of these would be most important to change and improve in your organisation? So please just choose one of the following below. A, better strategic planning, getting the priorities and jobs right. B, improve staff skills, leadership and staff development. C, improving communications from the top and engaging people. D, better communications with partners and stakeholders. Or E, improving processes for improved delivery to citizens. So I'll give everyone a few more seconds and then I'll show the results. Just give you all a few more seconds. Okay, let's see what the results are for the first poll question. So we've got 41% say A, better strategic planning. We've got 17% that says B, improve staff skills. We've got 33% for improving communications from the top. And we have 8% that says E, improving processes for improved delivery to citizens. I'm just going to launch the second poll question now. So the second poll question is, which of these is most important and would make the greatest difference? Again, please just choose one of the below. A, strengthening strategic and leadership capability. B, effective engagement at all levels. C, improving our measurement of performance. D, building effective delivery models. E, delivering more for less, or F, building skills now and for the future. So again, I'll leave everyone for a few more seconds just to answer this one. Give you all just a few more seconds. Okay, let's launch the results. So we've got 52% for A, strengthening strategic and leadership capability. We've got 30% for B, effective engagement at all levels. 4% on improving our measurement of performance. 4% again for building effective delivery models. Nothing for E. And then we have 8% for F, building skills now and for the future. The poll questions will remain open, so if those of you who didn't have a chance to answer, please do put your answers in now. Stephen, I'll hand back over to you. Stephen, sorry, you're on mute.
Thanks for noticing. So as you can see from this, from your poll and from the results here, this is the results taken back in 2007, actually, but I think it's still relevant in terms of some of these questions. And certainly on the first questionnaire, you all came, the majority of you came with improving better strategic planning. And that's very, very important to be able to look into what are we doing about our strategies? What are our strategies for the future? I've mentioned that we're not really more concerned with today, we're concerned with tomorrow. What are our strategies for the next 10 years? I've seen in various places people with strategic plans that run for 5 years. They're perhaps linked to a longer term strategy for 2030. We're now at 2025, so it's only 5 years ago, and yet people are still working on strategic plans that were set up in 2020 with objectives and targets for 2030. Those need reviewing, those need changing, so that we can now start looking at 2050. Improving staff skills, again, you came in fairly high on that. And communications, very important. 32% of you said communications are important. On the second one, you put leadership as quite high. It's in there, but ensuring the department is effective was more high in this particular survey. But leadership is now more important, I think, and you're quite right in the way in which you have voted there. Because if leadership is not good, then organizations don't change. The need to be able to convince ministers and senior leaders that change is necessary is important. And that's why these reviews need to see how we can instruct, give recommendations to those people to enable them to make the right decisions. And engagement is also important. That, as I said earlier, we're now getting to the stage where we need to have more focus on our employees, making sure that they're engaged and have the opportunity to contribute, and that their skills are developed in order to be able to take the organizations into the future, and for them to have the opportunities for career development and improvement. And delivery and measurement is also important, but we very often only measure what we're doing at the moment, as opposed to saying, what are our targets for the future? So the focus is on people, strategy, and change. I mentioned before that the way in which organizations are structured is very hierarchical, and we've moved away from those traditional systems and structures where there is a senior manager, 2 or 3 deputies, and then sub-deputies, additional ones, where we've got a one-to-one structure. But during the 1980s and 1990s, we started to look at, what are we really doing? We're delivering services to the public. And shouldn't we be more focused on an organizational structure that enables us to engage with the public? So we've turned the organization structure upside down to some extent and made sure that the people at the front line of delivery have the capability and skills to work with customers directly without constantly having to ask permission to say things and do things from their senior managers. And we're seeing flatter structures, and where the relationship between a manager and the number of people that they manage is far wider. And that some of those lowest level staff do have more responsibilities and more authority to make decisions. And we use project management structures to be able to interchange the skills and the people where they are necessary. And we've also moved to the use of public-private partnerships, where we're engaging more with the public sector rather than relying totally on government services. And certainly with, and certainly with the changes in government structures, we're no longer in many areas centralizing systems. We have local devolved control where individual districts, individual provinces, etc., local authorities have more authority, and not only for delivering the services, but for the management of their funds. And so we have to look at the financial systems that go along with that and make sure that they are working effectively and within the economic climate. And we've moved, since COVID, we've moved in most countries to more remote working, where people are no longer required to come into the office. So that changes the structures, changes the way in which buildings are utilized. And that the systems that we've got, the computer systems and the software and the interlinkages that we've got, enable people to self-service in things like HR systems, where they can record their own working time, their annual leave, and their training, without having to go and fill in forms and send them for authority. And also that we're again engaging more with the public directly through these systems and with each other. So I'd like now briefly to look at steps in the review process. As Claire and Amanda have already mentioned, there are courses available on this, but I'd like you just to take you through some of the basic steps of this. First of all, we need to engage with our clients, our ministers, our heads of departments, and determine the scope and terms of reference for the project, the intervention itself. What is it that they are struggling with? What are their main challenges? And one of the key aspects of that, I always point out, is that very often when we sit in a chair as a manager or a minister, we only see the symptoms of the problem. We don't necessarily fully understand what it is that is causing that problem. So these reviews by specialists are designed to go beyond that and therefore look at the way in which the organizations operate. What is it that they are doing that is causing those symptoms, and how can we correct them? So we need to look at policies. We need to look at mandates, laws and regulations, and the objectives and targets that have been set, and say, are they the right ones? Are they supporting what the organization is trying to do? And I've already mentioned outdated policies and outdated acts and etc. that need probably to change and be reviewed. Then we need, as I mentioned earlier, to look at the environment. And we use tools like PESTLE, looking at the political, economic, social, technical, legal, and environmental issues that are affecting the organization, both internally and externally, and make sure that those are fully understood. And then we look at the challenges. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are we good at? And how can we improve on those strengths and reduce the weaknesses? And look for new opportunities, but also looking for the threats from that pestle environment that may still exist and how we can mitigate them. And we've talked about, I mentioned, and we've looked at in the survey about engagement. We need to look at stakeholders, whether they be staff or stakeholders in terms of management, unions, etc., and ministers and private sector stakeholders. And how is it that the things we do at the moment are affecting them? And if we are going to change things, how it will affect them in the future? And are they going to be for or against that change? And how are we going to manage that relationship? And then we look at the current structures and functions and say, what is happening? How are we going to utilize those in the future, and will they work? And then we need to look at job content and skills, and perhaps do a job content and skills audit, a training needs analysis. And then we need to look at costs. What are the running costs? What are the capital expenditures versus revenue? And make sure that where there is difficulty with those, that we're utilizing them properly. I've seen cases where strategic plans and the financial estimates that have gone alongside them have very often focused on things that need to be improved and changed. But those aren't necessarily, they've probably been planned, say, 2 to 3 years ago, and yet the environment and the strategies need to change. And therefore, those costs, those priorities will change. And therefore, we don't necessarily need to spend the money where we thought we need to spend it. And therefore, we need to think about then reallocating those funds and how that affects the systems and processes that we're going to put forward. Then we need to look at redesign. And one of the alternatives there is to look at benchmarks. How other people are operating? What are both domestically and internationally, and what have they done and changed that has worked? And can we use those and adapt those systems and processes and structures to our own environment and see if they will work? And whilst we benchmark, we don't necessarily just take them on board and say, well, this is the system they used, it seemed to work, we'll use it. Those systems and structures work in different environments, in different cultures. What works in one organization or one country may not be appropriate in another. And so we have to take those benchmark examples and adapt them to our environment and what we need out of them. Then we need to design the options for new structures, functions, and jobs, and look at the pros and cons of each of those options, the costs and benefits that they provide, and then determine which of them is the preferred option, which stakeholders and decision makers can say yes to against an agreed set of criteria. What is it that we want out of this? Are we dealing with issues of speed, skills development, structural, the economy, etc.? So we look at those differing criteria and then match those against each of the options and decide which is the best for us. Then we need to plan skills development and changes to management's capability and staff's capability. And how are we going to adapt those in the short term? And I've mentioned educational systems. It's important to make sure that we're teaching people the right things, both from a primary school and middle school and tertiary point of view. Are we producing the right people for the right jobs for the future? And set indicators for success. Once we have that plan, we set in indicators for success. What are we going to do in the first, second, third years? And what will it look like in 10 years' time when we've actually put all of these systems and structures in place? And then from all of that, we create an implementation plan. The sorts of techniques we use are very traditional in nature, but also we can utilize, apart from desk reviews of documentation, interviews, questionnaires, focus groups and workshops, we can do process analysis so that we can understand the processes at the moment and where the blockages and gaps are in them, not only in the individual sections and departments, but across ministries and across institutions, so that we understand what is happening and where we can improve those processes. Activity sampling, getting statistical data about the workloads and how people operate and the activities and roles they undertake, And are they the right ones? And is there duplication or gap? And then I've already mentioned economic analysis. Cost benefit analysis and cost utility analysis are two particular ones that I use regularly in order to make sure that what we're offering as recommendations will work within the budgets and funding that is available to us. But all of this needs to take account of the challenges and barriers that we're likely to encounter, or the implementers are likely to encounter as we go through the changes. Many changes might have a consequence on loss of political and managerial power, especially if we're looking at things like delegating powers, creating employment and maintaining jobs. I've been in countries where, when I started exercises, the first thing that either a prime minister or a president or a head of a ministry said to me was, "We can't lose jobs." That creates a challenge. How are we going to maintain jobs when we need efficiency? And what are we going to do with surplus staff? Are we going to retrain them, redeploy them? Are we going to outsource the way in which we do things to the private sector? And have we got the systems in place to be able to deal with those changes and ensure that people's economies and lives are not interrupted adversely? And that very often puts pressure on things like pension systems, not only employee pensions, but also state pension systems. And because of a lack of funding, we have to take consideration of all of those aspects and the global and national economic stabilities as well. Lack of social support systems very often, both internally and around the organisation in the country, don't take account of these things. So we have to look at the welfare systems as well, because of the potential for economic and emotional degradation in terms of the changes. And I mentioned earlier as well that very often we're moving now to more integrated systems using the private sector, etc. And therefore we get into government ministries are no longer protected by competition. Anyone can do it. We have private sector institutions who can run prisons. We have private institutions that can provide health services, etc. And so we no longer have control over the central systems anymore. And I've been in instances over the years where there's been the potential for industrial action or social unrest as a consequence of changes. And we have to think about how we're going to manage those through engagement and communication, and make sure that the people who are affected by all of this, whether it be the citizens or the staff, are well communicated with and engaged, and understand what the change is and how we are going to mitigate the adverse effects of it. So managing the challenges requires engagement and involvement of all stakeholders and comprehensive communications. So when we're writing reports with recommendations, as well as implementation plans, we also have to have communication plans right from the outset, right from the point at which we agree with the client what the scope of the project is about. We need to immediately tell employees what is going to happen, why the review is being undertaken, and make sure that we communicate with them all through the exercise and at the end, ensuring they understand how it's going to affect them and what we are going to do to support them. So change is inevitable, as I've said, but we also need to be pragmatic. There's an idiom that Rome wasn't built in a day, reminds us that significant things don't happen overnight. They take time, effort, and patience. But we need to implement the changes in steps. And an organizational change guru, Kotter, came up with an eight-step change model. And what he said was that we need to prepare for change at the outset, create the environment, create the culture, and the willingness to change. And then we need to equip people to be and engage people to be able to make those changes. And then as we implement, we need to consolidate them and ensure that we're not going to retreat from the changes and go back to what we were doing before. So whether it be housing, whether it be health service systems or whatever, we need to think in terms of tomorrow. This is what they look like today, but we need to have vision, and we need to be able to recommend and change things for tomorrow. And I've mentioned AI very briefly, and we have various discussions and debates about how AI will affect us in the future. I think it's inevitable that AI will start to replace some jobs. And that's going to mean that we need to think about how we are going to utilize them effectively and protect people and give people the opportunity for jobs. And that's going to mean that jobs will change. We may not be just processing things, dealing with paperwork anymore. We need to be able to be creative. We need to think, we need to innovate, and we need to succeed. And therefore, we need to train our staff and develop the systems that they can control and operate, and that will change structure and functions and jobs. And we need to accept that that is possibly the inevitable, but we need to be able to be in a position to control it. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that's been useful in getting some idea about what we talk about when we're conducting organizational reviews and functional reviews. And I'd like to hand back to the PAI team now to close the webinar, but also now to deal with some of your questions.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That was excellent. Thank you. Colleagues and friends, you can see a slide up there which gives us a short summary of our new workshop on functional reviews, scheduled for October 2025. If you can't wait that long, then please do approach us. We're very happy always to do tailor-made versions of our workshops, or indeed tailor-made programs on other subjects not currently covered. So I think before we close, we have got some questions, and I think Amanda, you're going to you and I will share and read a couple, one or two each. The first one very neatly follows on, Stephen, from your comments.
Yeah,
about,
I can do.
AI.
So this question is from Brenda, and she is asking, how will artificial intelligence affect what the public sector does and the jobs people have now?
Yeah. Yes. Sorry.
Stephen, still with us?
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Your camera is off. There you are.
Technology gets in the way with me. Artificial intelligence, as I said, I think it's inevitable that we're going to see change in this area. We've already seen rapid change, as I said. No longer if I don't know, Brenda, which country you're from, but in the UK, if I go on any website or look for products or go to my bank or any other organization's website because I need to communicate with them, or if I pick up my telephone, what do I get? I get a chat box or a recorded message giving me alternatives. And it takes you through questions. You can put in what it is you want to talk about, and it will give you a typical answer. And by the time you get through all of that, eventually it says, I can't answer that question. I'm putting you through to a human being. So I think jobs in all organizations, not just the public sector, but the private sector, have changed significantly and will change. And I think I said in one of my earlier slides, that we've got to now start thinking in terms of people moving away from sitting at desks and just dealing with paperwork to be more engaged with the public directly, so that they have the opportunity to talk to us, and we can interpret their emotions, we can interpret their feelings, and give them back an answer that is going to be acceptable to them. Yes, things will get automated. We've seen that in the health service. Surgeries are now done by robots, or they're controlled by a surgeon who no longer is using his hands to actually touch the patient. They're doing it through systems that use gadgets. So I think those will change. We've seen it over the decades. I mentioned earlier, computers mean we all type. We no longer need secretaries. We no longer need stenographers. This webinar is being recorded. Anybody who wants to see it in the future can just press a link and listen to it and watch it. And so the way in which processes work and the way in which we engage will change. I don't think we can get away from that. The point is, we've got to be able to manage it, as I said, in terms of making sure that people have got jobs and occupations that occupy their time. We're not all going to become gamers and etc. So I hope that answers your question, Brenda.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So I'll read the next question is put by Dina Roy, who asks, how do you change an organization or indeed its leader when data is not being used to make good decisions or to improve the organizations? Dina Roy says there's a belief that political thinking is the same as a strategic decision.
Okay.
So thank you for that question, Dina Roy.
I used to work in the Civil Service College, the School of Government, and we used to use videos for training leadership. The Prime Minister or Yes Prime Minister videos, etc., to get them to start thinking about how does leadership work? What should leaders do? And I think the phrase "yes, minister" is the sort of start of my answer to this question. How do we get ministers to say yes? And I think it comes down, as you've indicated in your question, to applying data. And once you've got that data, which nowadays, because of systems, because of AI and all the rest of it, we have much more comprehensive data. And it's taking that data in papers, cabinet papers, or briefings to ministers and saying, look, if you go along this line in terms of your political or your philosophical thinking, these are the consequences. The data shows this. The data shows that if we take decision A, it will work. If we take decision B or C, it's less likely to work, or will have unforeseen consequences or consequences that we can't control. And so it's a matter of engaging with leadership and convincing them that their decisions are wrong. That's difficult, but that's, I think, the only way we can address these sorts of issues.
Okay, thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yes,
so Amanda, maybe
so
pick up the last question,
Rishi.
please.
And he's asking, the presentation is quoting mainly from the civilian part of the government. Are there any examples from the armed forces?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I've worked in several ministries of defence. Both from a civilian point of view and from the uniform side. I think what I've been saying applies to that as well. I mean, there is more civilianization in armed forces these days than there was. And when I talk about uniform services, I'm not just talking about the Army, Navy and Air Force. I mean, the police, prisons, etc. And whilst we still need staff who are at the front end of all of that, in a uniform, whether it's the police on the streets or in cars, or the armed forces with rifles and other machinery, a lot of the jobs now are being civilianized. It all depends where you are in the world and what is happening in terms of the political climate and war, etc. You know, in the police, data gathering, intelligence gathering was done by uniformed officers 10, 15 years ago. I have relatives, I know colleagues and friends who work in the police service now who are data analysts, and they're civilians. So their conditions of service change and the way in which they work changes. And many of those, as I mentioned earlier, now work at home, using technology to undertake these various jobs. So I think we have to also, think about how we're going to do that.
Thank you, Stephen.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you. So I think we've got maybe just one more slide to wrap up the session. Thank you very much. That's lovely. So this is just really to make note of a few of our workshops coming up, which are in many ways related to this topic of organizational functional reviews. You can see the most of the dates of 2025, although one or two later into this year. Please do get in touch if you'd like more information. And we'd like to hear from you anyway about how you found the webinar. I know there's been quite a lot of chat in the chat box, but feedback would be excellent. Yes, so the workshops mainly take place in London, but there are also one or two other locations, and we're always happy, as I say, to hold them in other countries. And they do provide quite a very good opportunity to network, to compare notes with UK practitioners, and also in some workshops where we can to go out and visit practitioners as well in government and parliament and media related organizations. So I hope that's been useful and interesting for you. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you again, Stephen, for leading us through this afternoon and sharing your very considerable experience. And thank you to you, Amanda, for setting it up and hosting us. So I'll say goodbye for now, and
goodbye,
please
everyone.
keep in touch. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everybody.